What really happened to Afia Honey? She posted a photo and the internet lost its mind. It didn't take long. A few 100,000 followers, a lifestyle page, smiling in the sun, posing by the beach, living out loud, and then the comments started rolling in. She looks completely different. That's not natural. Surgery has to be. And just like that, a woman named Afia Honey, a social media personality most people had never even heard of, became the subject of one of the internet's favorite pastimes, deciding what happened to somebody else's body. Today, we're going to talk about all of it. Not just Afia Honey herself, but what her story reveals about how we consume influencer content, why we can't seem to stop talking about women's bodies online, what actually drives physical transformation, and what it says about us as viewers that we feel so entitled to weigh in on a stranger's appearance in the first place. This is what really happened to the channel that goes past the headlines, past the gossip, and into the truth behind the stories the internet is obsessing over. If you're new here, welcome. If you've been watching, you know how we do this. We don't speculate to harm, we dig deep to understand. Before we go any further, smash that like button right now, hit subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss a video. It genuinely helps this channel keep doing what we do. Alright, let's get into it. Who is Afia Honey? Let's start at the beginning, because before we can understand what people are saying about Afia Honey, we need to understand who she actually is. Afia Honey is an Instagram personality operating under the handle at Afia Honey. At the time of this video, her following has grown to over 125,000 people, which in the landscape of social media, puts her squarely in what the industry calls the micro to mid-tier influencer range. She's not a mega celebrity with millions of followers. She's not a household name in the traditional sense, but she has a real engaged audience, and that matters. Her content falls into a lane that many lifestyle influencers occupy: fashion, travel, personal expression, body-positive imagery, and the kind of curated, living beautifully aesthetic that performs well on Instagram. She posts beach photos, she shares life moments, she presents herself with confidence. And for a growing audience, that resonates. Now, here's what's important to acknowledge up front. Afia Honey does not have a wide-reaching public biography. There isn't a verified Wikipedia entry. There's no in-depth profile in a major publication. Her story exists almost entirely within the social media ecosystem she's built. That's actually more common than people realize. In 2024 and beyond, you don't need traditional media coverage to build a loyal following. You just need content that connects. But that absence of formal documentation has a side effect. When there's no official record, no interviews, no long-form articles, no authoritative account of who you are, the internet fills the void with its own version of your story. And more often than not, the internet's version of your story is shaped less by facts and more by perception, by speculation, and by the projections of thousands of strangers who have never met you. That's Afia Honey's reality. And honestly, it's the reality of a lot of influencers in her position. They build something real, they attract real attention, and with that attention comes a kind of unasked-for scrutiny that most of us would find genuinely uncomfortable. So the question we really need to sit with as we go through this video is, what do we actually know, what are we assuming, and why are those two things so easy to confuse? The moment the internet noticed at some point, and these things rarely have a single precise origin, they tend to spread like a slow tide. Social media users began noticing differences in Afia's photos, older images compared to newer ones, side-by-side posts in comment sections, people zooming in, analyzing, debating. The vocabulary was predictable if you've spent any time online. BBL, implants, fillers, she's been under the knife. And on the other side, that's her natural body. She's just working out. Leave her alone. This is the pattern. This is almost always the pattern when a woman with a public presence undergoes any visible physical change. The internet becomes a courtroom, except nobody's qualified to testify, there's no burden of proof, and the person on trial didn't agree to participate. What specifically are people pointing to? Looking at her Instagram content, the conversation centers on her figure, the perceived increase in curves, particularly around the hips and buttocks, the appearance of a more sculpted silhouette. Comments reference before and after comparisons that circulate in DMs and in comment threads. People tag each other, they debate, they decide, and here's the part that never gets examined closely enough: almost none of this happens with any real information. It happens purely based on how someone looks in a photo. That's it. A photograph, filtered or unfiltered, posed or candid, shot by a professional or snapped on a phone. A photograph is being used as evidence in a trial that the subject didn't know was happening. But before we get into the psychology of why we do this, and we will get into it, let's talk about what actually could explain the changes people are seeing. Because the internet tends to leap straight to surgery without ever stopping to consider just how many other explanations exist. What actually changes a body? Let's get into this because it matters. Bodies change. This is not a controversial statement. This is biology. It is hormones and time and stress and rest, and what you eat, and how you move and how you sleep, and 1,000 other variables that no one on the internet knows anything about when they're looking at a stranger's photos. And yet somehow we've created a culture where any visible change in a woman's body is automatically treated as suspicious. as if the only explanation for looking different is surgical intervention. So let's walk through the real explanations one by one. The first and most obvious one is fitness. Targeted strength training, particularly focused on the glutes and hips, can produce dramatic visual results that look, in photographs, almost unrecognizable compared to a person's earlier physique. This is not fringe knowledge, this is basic exercise science. A dedicated program of hip thrusts, Romanian deadlifts, squats, and isolation work, sustained over 12 to 18 months, can genuinely transform how a person's lower body looks in photos. Combine that with a nutrition plan designed to reduce body fat while preserving and building muscle, and you have before and after results that people online routinely mistake for surgery. The second explanation is weight fluctuation and redistribution. Bodies store fat differently depending on hormones, age, stress levels, and genetics. A woman who gains even a modest amount of weight may carry it differently at different points in her life. Estrogen in particular influences where the body tends to store fat, often around the hips and thighs. Hormonal shifts, whether from natural cycles, birth control changes, or other factors, can visibly change a person's silhouette in ways that have nothing to do with anything surgical. Third, clothing. This one sounds almost too simple, but it's extraordinarily underestimated. The rise of shapewear, waist-training garments, and body sculpting fashion has been dramatic. A compression garment worn under certain outfits creates a visual effect that in a photo reads as a completely different body shape. Padding in swimwear, high-waisted cuts, strategic tailoring. Fashion is designed in part to create the illusion of a particular silhouette. This isn't deception. This is just clothing doing what clothing has always done. Fourth, photography itself. Angles, lighting, lenses, and editing change everything. A wide-angle shot from below creates the illusion of longer legs and a rounder silhouette. Direct side lighting emphasizes curves. A slightly elevated camera angle can make a waist look smaller. Photo editing apps, from Instagram's own filters to third-party tools, can smooth, sculpt, and reshape in ways that are subtle enough to pass as natural but significant enough to change how a body reads in a photo. We are looking at constructed images, not reality. Fifth, confidence and self-presentation. This is the most intangible factor, but possibly the most powerful. When someone is presenting themselves to the world with intention, when they've figured out their angles, their style, what lighting works for them, what poses feel most powerful, they look different than they did when they didn't know any of that. Early content from any influencer compared to content from a year or two later almost always shows a visible difference in how the person holds themselves. That's not surgery, that's growth. None of these explanations require a scalpel. And yet every time a woman with an audience changes visibly, the default assumption online bypasses all of them and lands on surgery. Why? That's the question worth asking. The influencer industry. What most people don't know. To understand Afia Honey's situation fully, you have to understand the world she operates in. Because the influencer industry is not what most people watching from the outside think it is. Social media has created an entirely new category of celebrity, one that is closer to the audience than traditional fame ever was, and yet paradoxically more constructed than almost anything Hollywood ever produced. Think about what it actually takes to run a successful lifestyle Instagram page. You're not just posting photos, you're essentially running a small media company. You're your own photographer, your own creative director, your own editor, your own PR department, your own social media manager, and your own talent, all at the same time. Every post is a decision. Every caption is a strategy. Every engagement rate is a number you're watching. The pressure to look a specific way within that system is enormous. Instagram's algorithm, for most of its existence, has rewarded certain types of content, imagery with high engagement, which tends to correlate with content that is conventionally attractive, provocative, or aspirational. This creates a feedback loop where the influencers who perform best aesthetically get more visibility, which teaches every other influencer on the platform what the rewards look like. And then there's the comparison culture baked into the platform's DNA. Instagram was literally built on the premise of sharing beautiful images. It's a highlight reel by design. Nobody, or almost nobody, is posting their worst day, their least flattering angle, their most honest mirror moment. What gets posted is the best version, the most confident moment, the most flattering light. This matters for how we interpret what we see. When you're looking at Afia Honey's Instagram, you're not seeing Afia Honey's life. You're seeing the moments from Afia Honey's life that she chose to share, presented in the way she chose to present them, filtered and edited and timed for maximum impact. That's not dishonesty, that's the medium. That's what Instagram is. But here's where it gets complicated, because viewers don't always hold on to that understanding. We look at Instagram long enough and the curated becomes normalized. We start to forget we're looking at a constructed image. We start to treat what we see as reality, and then we're shocked and suspicious when reality doesn't quite match up. That's one of the fundamental tensions of influencer culture. The product is aspiration, but aspiration requires a gap between what is and what is shown. And when audiences sense that gap, they often react with suspicion rather than understanding. For influencers in Afia Honey's position, building an audience, presenting themselves boldly, showing body confidence, that suspicion comes fast. And it comes loudest for women, particularly women who are curvy, particularly women whose figures don't fit neatly into either the thin ideal that dominated earlier decades or the more recent body positivity movement's most prominent faces. While we can't stop watching, the psychology of obsession here's where we have to be honest with ourselves. Not about Afia Honey, about us. Why are you watching this video? Why am I making it? Why do millions of people every day consume content analyzing the physical transformations of people they've never met and almost certainly never will meet? What is it about this particular genre of content, the what happened to her body video, the transformation breakdown, the before and after deep dive, that has become one of the most reliably popular formats on YouTube? The psychology here is genuinely fascinating, and it's worth sitting with for a minute, because understanding it changes how you consume this kind of content. Psychologists who study social comparison theory, first outlined by Leon Festinger in the 1950s, tell us that humans have an innate drive to evaluate themselves by comparing themselves to others. It's not a flaw, it's a feature of human cognition. We calibrate our sense of self through reference points. We figure out where we stand by looking at where other people stand. Social media is comparison theory on steroids. It takes a drive that evolved in small social groups and amplifies it to a global scale, feeding us hundreds of comparison points a day, every day, in an infinite scroll that never lets us step back and breathe. When we see someone like Afia Honey, someone who looks good, who presents herself confidently, who is getting positive attention, something happens in the brain. For some people, it's admiration. For others, it's aspiration. For others still, it's a subtle threat to their own sense of where they stand. And when our sense of standing is threatened, one of the most common psychological responses is to find a reason to discount the comparison. She got surgery. It's not real. She looks fake. These aren't just mean comments. They're in many cases a coping mechanism. If the person looks the way they look because of something artificial, something bought or injected or implanted, then the comparison no longer applies. The playing field wasn't level to begin with. We don't have to feel bad about the gap, that's one layer. Here's another. Human beings are deeply wired and fascinated by transformation. Every hero's journey story in human history follows the same arc. Something changes. Something that was one thing becomes another thing, and we can't look away from that. The caterpillar to butterfly narrative is one of the oldest storytelling templates we have, because it maps onto something real and universal in human experience. The possibility of change, of becoming, of shedding the old self and stepping into something new. Physical transformation stories tap directly into that wiring. We are not watching because we're shallow. We are watching because we are human, and transformation is one of the most deeply human things there is. Problem is when that fascination curdles into entitlement. When I'm interested in this person's transformation becomes I'm entitled to know the truth about this person's transformation. When consuming becomes demanding. When observation becomes judgment, and that's where we are culturally right now. The fascination is understandable. The entitlement is the problem. If this is landing for you, hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people find this video. And if you're new here, subscribe. We go this deep on every story we cover. Body image, social media, and the culture we're all living in. Let's zoom out even further, because what's happening with Afia Honey isn't really about Afia Honey. It's about the moment we're all living in, a moment where the relationship between bodies, images, and public opinion has been fundamentally transformed by technology, and we haven't caught up emotionally or ethically to what that transformation means. We are living through a period of profound confusion about bodies. On one hand, the body positivity movement has made genuine progress in expanding the range of body types that appear in mainstream media, in advertising, and entertainment. The conversation has shifted. There is more representation, more visibility, more language for talking about bodies without shamming them. On the other hand, the tools available for altering how bodies appear, both physically and digitally, have never been more accessible, more affordable, or more culturally normalized. Brazilian butt lifts were a niche cosmetic procedure a decade ago. Today they're referenced casually in comment sections by teenagers. Lip fillers, once associated with dramatic Hollywood transformations, are now discussed as routinely as getting a haircut. Facetune and similar apps come pre-downloaded on smartphones. Filters that reshape facial features are built into every social media platform. This creates an environment of profound uncertainty. When you're looking at an image of a person, you genuinely cannot tell what is real and what has been altered, either surgically or digitally. And that uncertainty breeds suspicion. It has to, because the tools of alteration have outpaced our ability to detect them. But here's the uncomfortable truth that follows from that. If we can't tell, then we're not actually making a judgment about the person we're looking at. We're making a projection. We're saying, I suspect something happened here, therefore I'm going to assert that something happened here, and I'm going to assert it publicly in a comment without any actual evidence, and I'm going to present my suspicion as a kind of certainty. That's a genuinely strange thing to do. And it happens millions of times every day on social media platforms around the world. For the person on the receiving end of it, for someone like Afia Honey, this has real consequences. There's robust psychological research on what happens when people in the public eye become subject to widespread speculation about their bodies. It increases anxiety. It can trigger or worsen body dysmorphia. Creates a feedback loop where the person feels they can never win. If they don't address the rumors, they're seen as hiding something. If they do address them, they're seen as protesting too much. And here's the layer that makes it even more complex. For women with curves, for women whose bodies are voluptuous and visible, and outside the thin ideal that still dominates much of mainstream beauty culture, the scrutiny is more intense and more personal than it is for almost anyone else. The question, is that real? Directed at a curvy woman's body carries an implicit message. Bodies like yours require an explanation. Bodies like yours are inherently suspicious. That's a form of bias. It's worth naming it clearly. Afia Honey's content. Looking closer, let's come back to the specifics, because the best way to understand what's actually happening with the Afia Honey conversation is to look at what she's actually putting out into the world. Her Instagram content at Afia Honey is consistent in its themes: beach settings, travel imagery, fashion, self-confidence, captions that celebrate life exploration, living fully. Comments that reference her figure are everywhere, but they're met with an equally vocal contingent of supporters who celebrate her look and her energy. What stands out when you spend time with her content is that this is someone who is intentional. The aesthetic is curated. The confidence is visible. This is not someone accidental.